Good evening, everyone. നമ്മുടെ ഇന്നത്തെ 54th സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ആനുവൽ കോൺഫറൻസുമായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുള്ള നമ്മുടെ ഇന്നത്തെ CME പ്രോഗ്രാം ആരംഭിക്കുകയാണ്. സോ we have the CME is basically intended to address our COVID-19 scenario, and we have been fighting COVID-19 for last few months. So we have started our vaccination programs, and we have the most eminent faculty in our country, Dr. T. Jacob John, to enlighten us on myths and truths of COVID vaccination. And incidentally, he is the only clinical virologist in India. And now we are facing post-COVID manifestations, and it is highly essential that we should be up to date in that. And we have learned faculty speaking on cardio, respiratory, neurological, and psychiatric issues. Dr. Varghese Spinoza needs no introduction, who is well known as a teacher and clinician. Dr. Arvind is well familiar to all of us and is a person whom we look forward when there is any management issues. And neurological issues are common, and we have already witnessed. And we have Dr. Dilip R, Associate Professor at GMC Trivandrum, who has been actively involved in treatment of COVID-19 patients. National Institute of Virology, Pune is the apex center of our country, and we have an eminent speaker, Dr. Rima Sahai, who will be taking a session on viral mutation and clinical relevance in the Indian scenario.
Although SMS and other transmission mitigation strategies implemented in most countries during this pandemic have prevented citizens from being infected to some extent, no immunity to SARS-CoV left us susceptible to additional waves of infection. I invite Dr. Janardhan Naik to introduce the next faculty. We are running short of time, sir.
Dear friends, there's no doubt that COVID is multi-system disease, and we thought that after getting rapid antigen test negative or RT-PCR negative, everything is okay. But the present picture is entirely different. We may come across more and more post-COVID syndromes or sequelae. There are many reports regarding the long-term neurological issues, that is post-COVID syndromes, in the medical literature. To discuss on this subject, we have eminent faculty from Government Medical College, Trivandrum. He is none other than Dr. Dilip Ramachandra. He did his DM from GM Thiruvananthapuram, and he is a fellow in stroke management. He did fellowship from SCT IMST, and he is now currently working as Associate Professor in Department of Neurology, Government Medical College, Thiruvananthapuram. He is a great academician and dedicated teacher. Let us hear what are the neurological sequelae in the COVID, after COVID. Over to you, sir.
So thank you for the nice words. I will try to project my slides. Are my slides visible now?
Yes, really.
Good evening, all doctors. I'm Dr. Dilip. We'll be talking on post-COVID neurology. I'll be looking on these things in a different point of view. Rather than going into the post-COVID complications, I will be looking into how to manage patients with neurological symptoms or neurological diseases who had a previous COVID infection. So I have no disclosures. I will be touching case-based scenarios, just touching about the major pathophysiological mechanisms, and will be just landing into a management aspect slightly. So this is the photo of Dr. William Osler, who was known as the father of modern medicine. In 1896, he told this sentence that fever is the most terrible enemy that humanity have. And 119 years later, in 2015, in a TED talk, our CEO of Microsoft, Bill Gates, told that the same thing, a virus, after 119 years, is more dangerous than war. So even though these great people told these things, we are now experiencing it directly. So my first case is a 87-year-old male. He had a COVID infection in September 2020. He had category B. He presented with an acute onset of a left-sided weakness on 18th of this month at 2 p.m. He reached our emergency department at 4:30 p.m. His score was full, GCS was full, his RBS was 110, his BP was 120/80. So from the history, we know that he has an acute stroke because it's an acute onset of focal neurological deficit. So it is acute stroke, no confusions. So whenever an acute stroke comes, the first investigation is a non-contrast CT, plain CT. Took a plain CT, and in that CT there is no bleed. You can see that there is a small infarct in the right frontal region. We proceeded with a CT angiogram of the brain, and you can see that bilaterally you can see that the intracranial vessels are filling. So patient is a case of an ischemic stroke without any major vessel occlusion, and he presented to us within 2 hours. So he is in the window period of IV thrombolytic drug. 2 hours, with less than 4.5 hours, he is in the window period. So he is a candidate for IV thrombolysis. So then the question comes, whether the past history of any COVID infection has something to do with this IV thrombolytic treatment? The answer is no. You can give IV thrombolytic drug directly to these patients. There is no need for waiting for any PTA, ANR, APTT, platelet, or any such type of investigation. The only basic investigation we need is a GRBS and a CT brain. So we gave the patient IV thrombolysis. We didn't take the patient for a mechanical thrombectomy because there was no large vessel occlusion. So IV alteplase is a drug which produces thrombolysis inside the vessel. That drug was received by the patient, and on the 3rd day after investigation, he passed discharge with a mild Davis left lower. So ischemic stroke and COVID. There are plenty of literature telling about association between this ischemic stroke and COVID infections. Many say it's casual, many say it is incidental, but actually what is the reason we don't know. Why incidental association is noted? Because many of these patients who are reported with strokes are elderly patients with all the classical risk factors of stroke like diabetes and hypertension. So we are not sure whether it is casual or incidental. So what are the main mechanisms which are put forward in the hypothesis of ischemic stroke in COVID? The first mechanism, as Arvind sir told, is the ACE2 receptor downregulation. The virus goes and binds with the ACE2 receptor. When there is ACE2 receptor downregulation, there are 2 RAS pathways in our body. One is a classical RAS pathway and another is a regulatory RAS pathway. When there is an ACE2 receptor downregulation, the classical RAS pathway take the upper hand and the regulatory pathway goes down. When the classical pathway goes up, the angiotensin 2 increases. When the angiotensin level increases, it produces vasoconstriction. So when there is a vasoconstriction, there will be BP fluctuations. When there is a vasoconstriction, there will be reduced blood flow distally. It will ultimately result in an ischemic state. The second proposed hypothesis is an endothelial dysfunction. The virus can produce endothelial inflammation leading to endotheliitis. When there is an endotheliitis, there is a thrombotic environment within the vessel which produces microthrombosis. The third proposed mechanism, when there is an inflammation after the cytokine, the persisting inflammation after the cytokine storm can produce destabilization of the plaques in the large vessels. Plaque may rupture. It can contribute to a stroke. The fourth mechanism is vasculitis, inflammation of blood vessels. Again, microthrombosis is ischemia. Prothrombotic mechanisms, as Arvind sir has previously told, along with CAHA, it can persist later. So there can be an increased amount of interleukins, especially interleukin 6, which can produce a prothrombotic state. There are plenty of cases showing that the anti-phospholipid antibody positivity in COVID-19 patients. Whether it is a casual association or incidental association, it's not sure, because any infection can trigger an APL antibody state. So it is not specific for COVID. Cardioembolic said at previous told, it can produce a viral myocarditis. It can produce inflammation, can produce a transient atrial fibrillations like arrhythmias. It can produce decompensation of a compensated heart failure, which can produce serve as a source of emboli. The last proposed mechanism is a right to left shunt and paradoxical embolism. So there are plenty of literature showing that there is a thrombotic state, and thrombotic state there will be DVT of the legs. So if there is a patent foramen ovale or there is a pulmonary AV malformation for fistula formation due to the chronic hypoxia, it can be the DVT from the leg can go to the right heart through this shunting. It goes to the left heart, then to the brain. So these are the proposed mechanisms of an ischemic stroke and a COVID. So any particular features noted, these multiple territory infarcts, more cryptogenic strokes, and large vessel occlusion in the young are the three major findings noted in literature. In our experience, we found that we compared July and August with 2019 and 2020. We found that there are more cryptogenic strokes. That means strokes of undetermined etiology are much more in 2020 when compared to 2019. And large vessel occlusion is also common, but we didn't find any statistical significant association. The management aspects, there is no difference. I again say there is no difference in the management aspects in an acute stroke patient after COVID, whether he is COVID, non-COVID, there is no difference. You have to push the trolley fast. Time is brain. Decide as early as possible regarding IV thrombolysis or mechanical thrombectomy. So going to my second case scenario, is a 60-year-old male. He has a history of COVID infection category C in October 2020. He was a hypertensive for 10 years. He developed acute onset of right-sided weakness in the morning of 15th. He reached early in ER. His score was poor. He was slightly drowsy. He had very high BP, 230/120. So again, it's a stroke. We took the patient for a non-contrast CT. You can see that there is a bleed in the left putamen. So this patient is having an intracerebral hemorrhage. He is having a post-COVID scenario, but patient is a hypertensive. The site of bleed is also typically a hypertensive site. So again, the question comes whether it is causal, whether it is incidental. So it's also a difficult question to answer because the proposed mechanisms tell that the same ACE2 dysregulation producing an increased levels of angiotensin 2 leading to vasoconstriction and a BP fluctuation is the first proposed mechanism. Second, the same endothelial dysfunction. Third is an interesting phenomenon, is a cerebral microbleeds. So in patients with COVID, in a patient with severe COVID, there is an amount of hypoxia. Due to this hypoxia, there is an impaired blood-brain barrier permeability, due to which the RBCs leak out from these vessels, and there are microbleeds, that is less than 10 millimeter size bleeds in the brain. So when there is a BP fluctuation, these microbleeds rupture and produce a major bleed. The fourth is a coagulopathy, where it is a persisting coagulopathy, CAHA, after the COVID infection, or the patient may be on no anticoagulants like rivaroxaban or apixaban. The patient can develop a bleed if the BP is uncontrolled. So any particular features are reported. The literature says that younger age group and lobar and multifocal hematomas are more common. We didn't notice any such association. Initially during the COVID, July, August, September, October season, we had a sudden surge in the IC intracerebral bleed cases. Our team and Arvind sir was frequently talking about what is happening now because the number of IC bleed was rising alarmingly. But the last November, December and January, we find that the this ratio is reverted. The ischemic stroke number is building up. So whether it is a direct causal relation to this COVID-19, which has increased this bleed, or the second hypothesis may be the patients with minor strokes or TIAs, which is a good number of patients in the acute stroke group, may have not turned up to our hospital during that time. That may be a second explanation, plausible explanation to explain this. So this is a diagram showing the multiple. You can see there is an MRI imaging showing small dots in the brain. These are microbleeds. So the management aspects of the IC and COVID, there is no difference in the treatment. Again, try to reduce the systolic BP of an intracerebral bleed patient to a level of 140 to 160 within a period of 30 to 60 minutes. Then you can prevent hematoma expansion, reduce the morbidity. So the treatment remains the same. Case 3, a 41-year-old female, COVID infection in November 2020. She had only upper respiratory tract symptoms. She presented to us for a headache for the past 1 week. She currently in our hospital admitted. She had no meningeal signs. Her CSF was normal. So a new onset headache in a 41-year-old female. She had no past history of headache. So we wanted to evaluate her. She was admitted and an MRI was taken. You can see that there is some white lines going here, white lines going here. These are subarachnoid hemorrhage. So there is a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the left temporo-occipital sulcal spaces. So we proceeded with the MRV. You can see that there is a filling defect in the left transverse sinus. So this is a case of cerebral venous thrombosis, which was presented as a sulcal SIH in the left temporo-occipital region. So cerebral venous thrombosis and COVID, then whether there is an association, is again a difficult question. Only hypotheses are there. Mechanisms, there is a prothrombotic state, same. Either the APL antibody, the past 3 months, we around had any 10 to 12 CVT cases. There is an increased surge in the CVT cases, but the 9 of these patients didn't have any history of COVID, didn't have any upper respiratory significant symptoms, but she had this COVID infection. So we don't think that the COVID is directly related to this, but maybe some CAHA-like phenomenology is persisting in some COVID patient which has COVID producing this CVT. No particular features for this COVID patient. The 9 versus 1 patient we compared radiologically, clinically, or all similar. There are no specific clues for anything. Manage with this anticoagulation. Start the patient on heparin. Then switch over to an oral anticoagulation. The problem is that you have to make sure that suppose if the patient is having a persistent CAHA state, you have to very careful about anticoagulation, especially heparin. If the patient is having an hematological abnormality, you have to target for an APTT of around 40 to 70. We usually target for a range of 60 to 80, and later switch over to an oral anticoagulation like VARF or dabigatran. If CVT, we have no evidence of rivaroxaban or apixaban. We usually prefer warfarin and dabigatran. So the case number 4, a 66-year-old female hypertensive diabetes, COVID infection in October, had only anosmia at that time. He presented with a symptom, slowly evolving symptom over a period of 1 to 2 weeks. On examination, he had an irreflexive quadriparesis with bifacial palsy. So an irreflexive quadriparesis, bifacial palsy, forced infection. There's only one diagnosis, is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome, we clinically diagnose and proceed with a nerve conduction study. The nerve conduction study, he had demyelinating features, which is suggestive of an acute inflammatory demyelinating polyradicular neuropathy. It's a demyelinating type of neuropathy. We have 2 options for these patients, plasmapheresis or IVIG. We gave the both options to this patient and he opted for IVIG. So COVID and GBS, all infections, almost many infections can precipitate a GBS. It is a basic mechanism, is molecular mimicry between a virus antibody with a gangliocyte, which is present in the myelin sheath of the nerves. So there is a demyelinating pathology. Any particularities? The literature says that AADP, AMAN variants are more seen. There are atypical variants of GBS who are very much reported. Miller-Fisher syndromes are reported, and polyneuritis cranialis was reported. We had a case of polyneuritis cranialis with COVID-19 infection, but he responded to steroid. We didn't give him because he was not affording IVIG or plasmapheresis. We have to give him, he improved. But rest of the other patient didn't have any history of any ADP or AMAN, and the previous case I told had a history of GBS. That patient was a case of AADP, a typical case of AADP, and we had a case of polyneuritis cranialis, but a history of AADP. So the management aspect, we can give both IVIG or plasmapheresis depending upon the treatment priority of a hospital. We usually go for plasmapheresis, but the problem is that plasmapheresis, you have to use a central line. So if there is a central line, if it's a line is in the femoral vein, there is a chance of DVT. If there is a persisting CAHA, the patient can have a high chance of DVT. So make sure that the patient is on a prophylactic anticoagulation. The case number 5, 23-year-old male, COVID infection in 3 weeks. He presented, it's a short history. 3 weeks back, he had COVID infection. He presented with a memory disturbance for 3 days. On examination, he had impaired episodic memory. So the clinical differentials were an ADEM versus encephalitis because post-infectious focal deficits. This is the MRI of the patient. You can see that there is an hyperintensity in the fornix region in the midline. It's a very rarely reported finding post-COVID. His CSF study was normal. He was symptomatically managed with steroids. The patient improved and he came for follow-up after 3 months last week. We used the MOCA score for assessing the cognition. He has completely improved now. So different types of encephalitis have been described. One of the major presentations of COVID is a hemorrhagic encephalitis where there can be bithalamic involvement with medial temporal involvement with hemorrhagic lesions, and acute transverse myelitis are also well described in the literature where the patients have intramedullary cord hyperintensity post-infections. These patients respond well to IV methylprednisolone. The last few slides, anosmia. Sometimes, usually the anosmia symptom is a self-limiting one. Usually it resolves by around 3 to 4 weeks. Sometimes, rarely it can persist. Persistent anosmia state can occur. Initially, it was thought that the anosmia is due to the involvement of the olfactory cells, but later it was identified that the ACE2 receptor was present in the support cells or the substantacular cells, and due to the involvement of these types of cells, there was an olfactory dysfunction. This was proved by MRI studies and histopathological studies where it showed that there is a hypertrophy of the olfactory bulb with inflammation of the olfactory bulb. So there is definitely an involvement of the olfactory system, but the main target maybe is support cell or the substantacular cells. So the other neurological findings, cognitive problems. This is a diagram. This is actually one artist, a young artist who had a COVID infection, drew this picture and it came in a newspaper. So this was her experience after this COVID symptoms that indicates her visual, her thoughts, the fogging of the thoughts, the difficulty in the concentrating, the memory problems all are major cognitive problems post-COVID. The major cognitive problem we see is an executive dysfunction, especially indicating a frontal lobe dysfunction. Many studies have proved that there is a frontal lobe EEG abnormalities are very common during the COVID infections. Other main symptoms are insomnia, and there is plenty that recently in Alzheimer dementia journal, there is a article regarding the increased risk of chronic neurological disease, like including dementia. So in 1918 flu pandemic, after this pandemic, there was a surge in the Parkinsonism patients. This is known as post-encephalitic Parkinsonism. We know there's a relation to it. Can be an increased risk of chronic neurological diseases like dementia or Parkinsonism later. So we don't know what future is. We must wait and see. So to conclude, post-COVID neurological involvement is not so rare, it is common. More research and data must be there. As Arvind sir told, more data is coming out every day by day. So by day, our knowledge about these complications and the management will improve. So we have to continue to keep our nose to the grindstone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You have covered all the areas in detail. There are no more questions to ask, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.